Hi, my name is Shondine. I'm an art director and co-founder at Subliminal.
And I'm Ryan. I'm also a co-founder and programmer at Subliminal, and we both worked on Button City.
So can you folks talk about what exactly the type of game Button City is?
So Button City is a low-poly, cozy narrative adventure about a young fox trying to save an arcade in the sky from this greedy fat cat named Peppermint Pepperbottom. You meet up with a bunch of friends at the arcade, try to become arcade champions, and then go on this little adventure that has you do puzzles, play arcade games, go up against rivals, and then try to take down this greedy fat cat.
So what made you folks decide to use animals as your main characters in your game?
That's mostly me. I'm an animal lover. I love cats. And we kind of happened upon the concept by accident. I was working on learning 3D, doing some low poly modeling, and I just kind of started off with a little fox character in a house because I like Animal Crossing. And that little concept just kind of took off into its own thing, and we turned it into a game. So we just kept adding more animal characters and basing it off that original concept.
Did you talk about, like you mentioned the little poly models, your game is super stylistic and very cute. Can you talk about some of the inspirations that went behind that? You mentioned Animal Crossing.
I generally like colorful things. I started off as a graphic designer. I'm definitely always working with color and shapes, and I was kind of thinking that Button City was a little more like creating vector art with the kind of like shadeless style that we work with, so every angle kind of looks interesting and cool in 3D. And I got a lot of inspiration from kids' toys, 2000s, 90s kind of like kid culture. So we have like a lot of fun little references to kind of like that bold graphic style in the game.
And you guys have a lot of, like you mentioned, it's about an arcade in the sky, and you guys have just a plethora of different genres in arcades. You have racing, you have DDR, you have all these throwbacks to 90s arcade games. Can you talk a little about the different mini games that are available to play in your world?
Yeah, so the first one is GoBots, which isn't, I guess, like typical American arcade game. It's a 4v4 MOBA light, I guess would be the easiest way to say it. But we were inspired by like kind of our local gaming community that we were part of, and we were playing a lot of Splatoon at that time. But for that one, like we wanted to make something that felt like could be at an arcade, that was kind of like a central piece for kids to come around, form teams, form a community around. So how can we make something where there would be like a Saturday morning cartoon of it? Or comics, and then have a community around it also at the arcade. There's some Japanese like kind of team-based like arena hero type of stuff also, but this one like we really wanted to like distill it down to kind of like the core components and put a little bit of a mechanics twist on it. That's where we get the kind of like grab the goba berries from trees and take it to like the central blender, instead of it being like like all out deathmatch or going after like towers like in a MOBA or something like that. So that's for like the main central GoBots game. For Revolution Racer, I think for the other two games, Revolution Racer and Prisma Beats, we were just like, well, these are the kind of games that we play at the arcade here, and that we're active community members in. So like I'm playing a lot of anime drift racers like Maximum Tune, a little bit of Initial D, but they don't have the progression at my arcade, so can't really tune up your car on that one. So Revolution Racer is an electric drift racing game where you drift down a mountain up against rivals, so you could store up battery energy and then boost off into the night. And then Prisma Beats, Shondine is really into the rhythm games community here, and we wanted to just celebrate that and celebrate the music that we have in the game. So we have a couple original pieces just for the game itself, and then you're able to also collect music from around the game as well.
Is it difficult juggling so many aspects of game design? Because you have your narrative and your characters, but you also have, like you said, your three separate mini games that that are all different. It's not like one core concept. You have racing, you have rhythm, you have a rhythm DDR game, and you have the GoBots MOBA game. Is it hard to get that all together to flow well and allocate your resources correctly and all that stuff?
Yeah, so from a programming standpoint, we were able to like kind of do like a hard split where I would take kind of like the main game and all of its pieces, and then we had another programmer, his name's Ben. he would work on all the arcade games. So we were able to pretty easily split off like what we needed to work on, and that helped in some ways in that we weren't really like stepping on each other's toes and like having, you know, like conflicts in trying to like merge code together and things like that. So that kind of freed up some stuff. In other aspects, it is harder because, you know, it is like, oh, you have to make a compelling 3 additional compelling games. But Shundine worked amazingly on the Prisma Beats levels. Like, she made really fun levels, and Ben did an amazing job working on programming. And then Val, our other artist, she did amazing artwork for both Prisma Beats and Revolution Racer.
GovaBots and Revolution Racer.
Sorry, GovaBots and Revolution Racer. Thank you. So yes and no all at the same time.
Yeah, I think making it a cohesive kind of game was one of the challenging parts too with the rhythm games. Even going down to control schemes. We're on multiple platforms, and we wanted it to feel cohesive and easy without adding in too many buttons once you hop into a mini game. So that was a challenging kind of like design point. Also making kind of like the flow into going from the main game into the mini games, and integrating that into kind of like how a player would navigate the world.
Also, you guys have so many different like models and arcade machines and environments, and like they're all low poly, but they all look just really stylistic and beautiful. Like, is it hard to make like, because sometimes someone looks at like pixel art, right, and they're like, oh, that's easier to do because it's, you know, it's not hyper realistic. But like in this case, was it harder to do something so stylized and low poly as opposed to doing something hyper realistic or pixel art style?
The technical part is easy to put together, the artwork and the assets. A lot of it comes down to style. Like, it seems simple, but there were some like conceptual pieces around it. Like, most of the squares and the objects in the game, they aren't completely symmetrical. So you'll get tables that are tilted a little bit slightly. One side is a bit larger than the other. And it all kind of adds to a visual rhythm. So every single little piece in the game comes together as a cohesive unit. So like a room, I would think of it more like putting together an entire room rather than modeling individual pieces, and just like working together with our other artists, trying to nail down the style, like working on, oh, this one looks a little bit too low poly, or this one needs, this one has too many polygons. So kind of just like getting it all to gel together.
I think something that a lot of consumers and just normal people don't really realize in the color space is color theory, and how important it is how colors mesh well together and how they work. Can you talk about how you made that work? Because you're like you said, your game is so vibrant and colorful that had to have been a challenge making sure that everything looked great and was still readable and all that stuff.
It was a little systematic. So we have a world color palette. So there aren't more than 36 standard colors that we use in the world. And what I kind of did, we unwrap all of our artwork onto one texture model. So it's a bunch of little squares of colors. And I balanced all of those colors together when I was originally creating the palette. So I'd put different tones and hues kind of next to each other to see how they contrast. And each colorway, each hue will have like 4 different shades. So red has 4 different shades, pink has 4 different shades. And it was very systematic and thought through from the beginning. And once we had that color palette to work with, it was really easy to keep like rolling with that and making assets that worked well together.
And just because I'm curious, Button City, where did the name for your game come from?
It was originally called Fennel Fox after the main character. That was also when it wasn't centered around the arcade itself. I was bad at naming names, so she came up with it.
Yeah, it kind of emerged from like, we were chatting with some friends trying to like think of some names, and we were talking about this arcade in town called Nickel City, and that seemed really interesting to us. And buttons, it's kind of a double meaning, so it's like buttons playing on the arcade machine, but also we turned the currency, the in-game currency, people call that buttons. So like you can go around town, collect buttons from characters and spend buttons at Button City.
What made you decide to go with a cat as your big villain for this game, story-wise?
That's kind of a silly way.
Okay. So we have a puppet named Peppermint Pepperbottom, and he was around before the game, and he had just such a big personality. And Shundine, like, is the one that voices the puppet and everything, and she was just like, do all these kind of like pyramid schemes with the puppet, like peppermint yoga bottoms and like all these things, trying to like sell to our friends and stuff. So we're just like, well, we needed a villain. So, oh gosh, we take him to soccer games now. So, yeah.
So I have to ask, wait, this puppet that's now in the game, was this like, did your friend do puppetry professionally? Did she have like a show, like on public access or a YouTube series or something?
Oh, that's me. So, it's just a hobby. I have a little set of puppets. They're like hand puppets. I bought them at like a little bookstore. I just kind of play around with them. I used to take them to like one of my old jobs at the office and like play around with my coworkers with them.
That's so fun. Like, you know, it's fun. That's a cool hobby. And I don't think I've never really seen that hobby before. I know they had it in Forgetting Sarah Marshall. Like he had he really was fascinated with Muppets, and he always wanted to do like a Muppet show. That's the only time I've heard of it. That's really cool to see someone have. But my wife has some puppets when she used to work with kids because it's good for therapy. So, but yeah, that's a really cool story. You guys are releasing across all platforms: PS, PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo Switch, and PC. Did you guys do? You guys aren't doing all the ports yourself, are you? Do you outsource some of that work, or are you doing all of it alone?
That's all me.
Are you doing it all?
Yeah, well,
Oh my
Ben
God.
helped a little, but he became a full-time dad, and then it went all to me. Yeah, so we started porting back in January, and that was a time. It was good. Yeah, it's just a lot of work, and making sure that it's up to snuff on all the consoles. All of them were really helpful, and from the beginning, we had kind of cross-platform in mind, so we already had like we were already thinking of structures, how we could make it easier to make save things easier, making controller stuff easier. There were some things that did trip us up a little bit, but you know, overall I think we did really good ports on, you know, all the versions. And we even ported to this thing called trail.gg, which is on the web, so like we're in a lot of places that they have our demo right now, and it runs really awesome. I think it was a lot of work, but you know, I hope that players are able to play on the platform that they love. And you know, we put in some cool features for like PlayStation. Like they have the activity cards. Like we made it so you could get into arcade games really fast, and it loads so fast. Oh my gosh. So it's just like really exciting to just be able to get the game out to, I don't know, it's always been a dream of mine to have a game on consoles. So when we were able to do that, you know, like it's just like really exciting, even if it was a lot of work.
What was the most out of all the platforms, if you can say, what was the most technically challenged for you personally?
They each had like their own in like different ways, but you know, it's like I think for PlayStation getting the activity cards, it wasn't necessarily hard. It's just like, you know, kind of picking and then like making sure like it all works, because they have like this deep linking feature, so making sure that if you started an arcade game in the middle of a story, that it would just go into the arcade game like cleanly, and then, you know, not mess up your save file. So things like that. We didn't, because of like our art style and stuff like that, we didn't have to like really try to eke out performance on like devices too much, thankfully. Nothing like too bad, but
I think
you know,
have
it's
to
just
go
like
back and fix most things on for Nintendo Switch, right? It seemed like it.
a little, but I think that was just like a general optimization. So yeah.
Because Nintendo Switch, you have to like optimize for two modes, right? Handheld and docked, right? So you have to, sometimes games have to change their UI based on that because it's too small for handheld.
Thankfully, Shundeen just knows how to like make UI for all sorts of resolutions.
I was working as a web designer for a period before this, so I worked a lot with like responsive design, especially being very accessible with like how large your fonts are or how like readable the UI is. And we spent a period of time also making kind of like a mobile version of the game. So once it was readable on mobile, it was really easy to see that it would work for like Switch and handheld mode.
Your game absolutely seems like, there's no other word for it, delightful. It just seems like a delightful, cute game. When do you guys have a release date? And are you releasing on all platforms simultaneously?
So we're going to be releasing next month on August 10th, and we're releasing on Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 5, Xbox Series, and Steam on Mac and PC for our first release. And then after that, we're going to be announcing some others, some more backward compatibility with some of those platforms as well.